Okay, Austin, Texas, South by Southwest 2024. Welcome to Tuesday morning. I've seen a lot of sessions that were a little bit dry, and that's not a knock to South by Southwest. That's just to say I don't ever want to take myself too seriously on the stage. And so I'm not going to be doing stand-up, but I do want to say that Tuesdays are my least favorite day of the week. I've always said that we're all on the same page about Mondays. We're all on the same page about Wednesdays being the middle of the week. Thursday is the day before Friday. Friday is Friday, Saturday is Saturday, and Sunday is scary. But Tuesday, there is nothing good about a Tuesday. So I hope to make this Tuesday a little bit better for all of you. My name is Imran Nuri, and I lived in my Toyota Camry for 84 days to drive 15,298 miles to all the lower 48 US states to ask 1,000 complete strangers about what they know now that they wish they knew earlier. In other words, life advice. We'll get to the stories of how I got a matching tattoo with a man who was dying of cancer. We'll get to the story of an RV tipping over due to the wind on the highway in front of me, blocking all the lanes of the highway for 2 hours, stuck there. We'll get to the story of getting handed a military-grade M4 rifle in rural Mississippi. But first, we have to understand what might compel a person to go travel the entire country looking for the meaning of life from complete strangers. So let's start with the most traumatic period of my life. Spring 2019. This will be the only trauma dumping I'll do for you, I promise. Spring 2019 was very, very, very tough for me for a couple of reasons. Number one, I was a junior at The Ohio State University. Go Bucks. Anybody? Any other Buckeyes here? Yes! What? 2 Buckeyes. Go Bucks. I was a junior. I was studying business. I was in an honors program that was extremely rigorous. It was like doing an MBA as an undergrad student on top of all your other class load, except you don't get the MBA degree at the end of it, which I'm definitely not salty about. And on top of that, I was the president of an organization called Buckeye-thon, a dance marathon program that raises money for childhood cancer research. And that was a 30 to 40 hour a week volunteer role on top of my classwork, on top of everything else. And as if that wasn't enough to stress me out, life said, I'll give you one more thing to worry about. After spring break, my first serious relationship, my girlfriend broke up with me, dumped me out of nowhere. And one more piece of trauma dumping, my parents were going through a divorce. I say all of this not to make you feel bad for me, but because all of that led me into therapy for the first time. And in therapy, the biggest thing that I learned was that I was deteriorating my own friendships because I was trying to prevent my friends from making their own mistakes. If my friend said they were going to do something that I thought was risky or dangerous or whatever, but not life-threatening, I'd try to prevent them from bumping their own head. And of course, nobody wants the parent friend. That's so annoying. I was so annoying in that way. And my therapist said, it's underlying all of that, it's nice that you care about your friends and want to make sure that they don't get hurt, but in reality, everybody has to bump their own head. Everybody has to learn from their own experiences. Why rob your friends of the chance to learn from their own experiences? And I said, well, what do I do? How do I help my friends? And she said, share your experiences, not your advice. Anybody here who's an EO knows to share experiences, not advice. So I say that because we'll get back to that. Also in spring of 2019, I, as a business student, as some of you might know, you're supposed to get an internship after your junior year. You crush it, you work your butt off that summer, you get a full-time offer, and you just kind of chill out for senior year, and then you go do the predictable 9 to 5. And as a high-achieving business student, nothing about that was appealing to me. That's too easy. I was like, I know that me and all my friends can get these amazing internships. I know we can get high-paying jobs. I know this is possible. That is what we are supposed to do. And I feel like I'm supposed to be in a period of my life where I'm supposed to be learning as much as I possibly can. So in a seminar in my honors program, I said to my students, my peers, I don't know what I would learn more from. Doing what you're doing, Fortune 500 company internship, getting paid a lot, going to a cool city, or pushing myself radically out of my comfort zone and doing something crazy like hopping in my car to drive across the country and talk to strangers, collect their stories. Believe it or not, even then, I could go on stage and crush it, but I could not muster up the courage to walk up to somebody in a grocery store and just say, I like your shoes. I really wanted to be able to say, I like your shoes to a stranger. It sounds so simple, just the fear of talking to strangers. And instead, I did neither of those two things, and I started a nonprofit startup that summer. And this could be a whole other talk, so I'm going to summarize it really fast. The 52 Million Project, which I started as a senior at Ohio State, had a mission to democratize philanthropy by having 1 million people donate $1 for every week of the year. Every week it would go to a different nonprofit fighting poverty. And after experiencing Buckeye-thon, and my year we raised $1.7 million, I learned a lot about how nonprofits operate, and I thought, what if instead of 1.7, I could raise 52 million and make a huge impact, democratize philanthropy, bring people together and show that just by giving up $1 a week, we can make such a huge impact. And it didn't work. The long story short, I worked on it full-time as a senior. I worked on it full-time for a full year and a half after graduating, and it never scaled. Again, that's a talk for another time. But who in here has ever shut down a business, something you've built from nothing? Has anybody in here done that? Yeah, devastating. It is emotionally and physically devastating to build something for thousands of hours and then shut it down. So I moved to Chicago at the end of 2021 after shutting this down, and I pretty quickly got a job working from home. This is my cat, CK. I pretty quickly got a job doing marketing for a startup, and the role was essentially the CMO of that startup, which should have been awesome. I was like 24 and overseeing marketing for a startup. It sucked. There's no other way around it. It should have been awesome. It was so bad. The CEO, who I love as a person, was a horrible leader. Had no vision for the company. And as a marketer for a startup, if I don't know where the company is going, what am I supposed to communicate to anybody about our company and where we're going? So I really disliked it. All of that to say, going through the traumatic spring 2019, going through building a startup nonprofit and shutting it down, and then going into a job 9 to 5 that just sucked, pushed me into a quarter-life crisis. And to answer my quarter-life crisis, or to push myself past it, to try to figure out what I wanted out of life, I asked myself one very big question. And I'll give you a dramatic pause for you to think about it for yourself after. But that big question was, if I only had 1 year left to live, how would I live it? Cue the dramatic pause. I knew exactly what I would do with my final year. I would figure out the meaning of life. Bold task. I grew up in a very religious Muslim household, and of course when you're religious, especially for those three major monotheistic religions, your purpose is to be good in this life to get into the afterlife. And as I started to reject that religion, that purpose went away. I was like, I don't even know what I'm doing anymore. So I would travel the country in my final year. I would ask 1,000 strangers for life advice or what they believe to be true about life, and then I would photograph every single one of them to create the largest art series I had ever created in my life. I've always been an artist, and I would immortalize the fact that we had met, me and all these strangers. I would travel the country, see the United States, talk to strangers, and then I would spend time with people I love and care about. That's what I would do with my final year, and I took that very seriously. So in the beginning of 2022, I started practicing. I was living in Chicago, and again, talking to strangers scared me to death. And I started walking around Chicago, just talking to people, and I tried a couple different questions to see what I might get. The first question, naturally, that I asked was, what would you do with your final year if you knew you had a year left to live? And it turns out most people would travel and spend time with people they love. And I didn't really want to hear that 1,000 times. So I tried some new questions, and the one I landed on was, what do you know now that you wish you had known earlier? And I got the most fascinating answers. This guy, for example, who I met near Edgewater in Chicago, about 8 miles north of downtown, I walked up to him and I asked him my big question. And he said, I really messed up my credit in my 20s. And I'm still paying for it in my 30s. I really wish I had been more responsible with my credits, or I wish somebody had taught me about credit. Alas, here I am in my 30s, still facing the repercussions of my poor decisions in my 20s. And that's not something I was going to get from somebody who was trying to decide what to do with their final year. Honestly, your credit doesn't matter if you have a year left to live, right? You're going to blow that thing through the roof. But it was fascinating. This guy said that. Another woman talked about how her mom had died the week before, unexpectedly. And she said, I wish I would have spent more time with my mom instead of going out so much with my friends. There were so many nights that I just said, I'd rather go out with my friends. And I did, and I had fun. But looking back, I'll never have the chance to spend time with my mom again. I still get goosebumps thinking about that. This was just testing it. And so I'm like, oh my God, this is it. This is the question. This is the one that's gonna get me some really fascinating keys to life. And so I started planning, I started budgeting, I didn't have enough money, so I took out a personal loan. I decided I was gonna quit my job to live off of for at least a few months, up to 100 days to travel the country. I started a Patreon where people could support me and get behind the scenes updates along the way. And I gave my boss a 6 weeks notice because I knew 2 weeks would wreck them. 6 weeks notice, and at the end of April, I went back to Columbus, Ohio, and I gathered my things, I tinted my windows, because in that limited budget of about $10,000, once again, paid for by a Patreon and a personal loan, not my own money, as an investment into myself and learning about life, I was gonna have to live in my car. I couldn't afford hotels, it would double the budget, so I was gonna have to sleep in the front seat of my Toyota Camry at rest areas, and I was up for that challenge. I was up for pushing myself out of my comfort zone and growing in that way. So I tinted my windows. You can see they were dark, and even in daylight you couldn't see through them, let alone at night. You can see all my stuff, and if you can, I spy my cat, another cat right there in the middle. That's Prince. He and CK stayed with my dad for those 3 months, and on May 10th, I left. And I went into downtowns and parks and anywhere where people might be. And I would walk up to people, typically who were alone, because when I tested this series on the much smaller scale in Chicago, I found that I got much better answers from people one-on-one than if they were with their partner or a friend. Because think about it. If I walk up to you in my yellow Crocs, and I say, excuse me, can I ask you a question? And then I give you my spiel. I'm traveling across the country, talking to 1,000 strangers, asking them for life advice. I'd love to take 2 minutes of your time to ask you a question. And I ask you, what do you know now that you wish you knew earlier? If you're with a friend or a partner, the first thing you do is say, I don't know, what do you think? And I don't care what you or your friend thinks. I don't care what your friend thinks about you. And everybody, to some degree, puts on some kind of act in front of different people. We change depending on who we're around to some degree, I think. I didn't want to know what your friends thought about you. I didn't want to hear your answer based on the judgment of who's around you. I wanted to hear what you believe you wish you knew earlier, one-on-one. I don't know anything about your past. I don't know your friends. I don't know if you're lying to me. But I hope you're telling the truth, because there's no reason to lie to a stranger, truly. So I'd walk up to them, I'd give them my spiel. About 99% of people said yes to the initial question of, can I ask you a question real quick? And I always was holding my camera too, just like this. I'll give you the visual. Yellow Crocs, 50-year-old camera. Imagine me walking up to you just saying, excuse me, can I ask you a question real quick? And of course, 99% of people said yes to that, because who's this brown man in yellow Crocs with a 50-year-old camera walking up to me asking me a question? What could it possibly be? And I would give them my spiel, and about 80% of people said, sure, I'd love to spend 2 minutes with you. And sometimes that was actually 2 minutes, sometimes it was 10, sometimes it was an hour. And I would hand them a microphone. I was always wearing one. I would hand them one. I had it recording directly into my phone so I could transcribe it later in their own words. I didn't want to recount their words later. And they gave me the most remarkable answers. So I'd like to share a few of my favorites. And of course, you're here to learn the meaning of life. And I promise you, we're going to get to that right at the end, so stick around. But there are some major themes to this, but I think you'll enjoy some of these stories first of all. So this is stranger number one, who I met in Rising Sun, Ohio. So my hometown is Columbus, Ohio, and my map was going to be clockwise around the country, as clockwise gets for the United States. I went clockwise, and I thought I would get Columbus last. I wanted to have the perspective of the entire country behind me before I got my hometown. So I drove up towards Toledo, and at some point I'm in the middle of nowhere, Ohio, on like some back highway, and I see a flower farm, and I'm thinking, oh my God, this is the perfect first stranger. I'm gonna meet this sweet old lady who's growing flowers in the middle of Ohio, living her best life. And instead I pull into a dirt parking lot, and I see this guy just like, I have to give you the visual, because I pull into the parking lot and I see like one of those like translucent flower tents. I don't know what they're called, a nursery, I think. But I see this guy come over like hobbling like this, and he looks up at me and he looks away and then just disappears out of sight. And I'm like, oh God, this is the one. I picked the one who's gonna kill me on the first go. Just my luck. I just decided to do something crazy and figure out the meaning of life, and I'm not even gonna get to talk to one stranger. So I get out of my car like an idiot, and I go up to this guy, and I'm like, hey, how's it going? Like, nice flower farm, trying to make small talk. And then, without even saying hi, no smile, he points to my camera and goes, what's that? And I was like, oh, it's a camera. I'm actually driving across the country talking to 1,000 strangers. I'm going to ask them for life advice. I'd love to ask you a question. He says nothing and walks away out of sight again. Again, middle of nowhere, Ohio. I'm like, holy shit, I need to get out of here, like right now. But I don't know why, but I persisted. Probably male privilege, to be honest, like honest to God. I just went into the flowers. I went into the flower farm and I looked at his flowers. He comes back and I'm like, I give him my spiel again. I'd love to ask you a big life question and take your photo if you're up for it. He's like, let me think about it. He, again, leaves and then comes back. And his life advice, and I'll be honest, I was gonna use my book to do a not so subtle product placement and read the advice straight from there. But I made the mistake of making my book 7 pounds and 700 pages, which is not so conducive for holding a mic and that at the same time. So I've got it on my phone. At first, the stranger said, I asked him my question, what do you know now that you wish you knew earlier? He says, visit your parents more often. And I followed it up with, tell me more. Well, I spent plenty of time with them growing up before I moved out of the house, but not as much after that. They're not around anymore. And at 24 years old, for me, hearing that, and both my parents are still alive, I was like, oh, spend more time with your parents. That actually hits really hard. Like, your parents aren't going to be around forever. Cherish the time you have with them. And here's this scary guy, like, and I got this beautiful advice out of him. But on top of that, what's not included in my book or anywhere else is that after that, he told me how he had built the house behind us with his bare hands. I was like, oh, cool, you build houses. He's like, yeah, well, I did. But then I got into, me and my brother were hunting one day, and my hunting jacket caught on fire, and the plastic zipper melted shut, and he had to tamp me down, but not before I lost a few fingers, and my entire body, he literally lifts up his shirt, not before my entire body got scarred, so I can't really build houses anymore, so I decided to start growing flowers. Imagine if I hadn't given this guy the chance to just talk and think. And maybe he would have been dangerous. Was it stupid for me to take the weird risk with all these signs of like, this guy's kind of weird? Probably. But I'm glad I did. I got these amazing stories out of it. So a lot of people asked me, as I've done, I did this series in 2022, and a lot of people asked me, like, did you just seek out older folks for their advice? And I said, well, I don't think that wisdom is guaranteed with age. I think wisdom is guaranteed with experience, and it's entirely possible that people who are younger have had a lot of intense or real experiences, and if nothing else, they're alive. They have survived to this point, and everybody learns that is part of the process of getting older at all. So I didn't discriminate. I was like, I will talk to anybody, any age, any gender, any race, whatever. It doesn't matter. I want to talk to everyone. And so this person's obviously younger. She's in her 20s. And I met her in Alexandria, Virginia, stranger number 304, and she said, nobody thinks about you as much as you think about yourself. So don't take yourself too seriously. How many of you can relate to that? Don't take yourself too seriously. Nobody actually thinks about you as much as you think about yourself. When I put on the yellow Crocs this morning, and I do wear yellow Crocs a lot, I was like, man, who's staring at me right now? I bet everybody's looking at this weird guy in yellow Crocs walking around 6th Street or whatever. And the truth is, I'd be willing to bet nobody cares. Or if they noticed it, it was like in one ear, out the other, you know what I mean? So that was a beautiful piece of advice. Stranger number 413, this is one of my favorite. I shouldn't have favorites, but I do. This is one of my favorite strangers because I was, as some of you can tell, I am a person of color. I am the first generation American born and raised in Ohio, the son of 2 Indian immigrants, and I grew up in Ohio. I grew up in Columbus. I spent all my life in the Midwest. I had never really traveled in the Deep South, and all you really hear when you're a person of color living in the Midwest is that the Deep South is scary for people of color. And I was very nervous about this, but of course I had to go to all the lower 48 US states, and that was gonna include the Deep South. And it was going to include rural areas in the Deep South. So at some point, I'm at a rest area, and every Sunday I would spend about 6 hours in the coffee shop editing a weekly vlog to update my Patreon subscribers on what had happened that previous week. And I needed to edit that video that week. So I go up into Brookhaven, Mississippi, a town of 10,000 people. I find a beautiful coffee shop. I sit down, and I'm ready to grind and make this video. To my surprise, this guy comes up to me first, and he says, "Are you a photographer?" And I was like, I sure am. He goes, me too, actually. My name's Daniel. I'm Imran. And he was like, I've got a production company here in Brookhaven. I make ads and I take photos for people, for clients, for products, all of that. I just saw that you had Lightroom open on your laptop. And I was like, yeah, let me tell you about this crazy thing that I'm doing right now. And of course I tell him, and his jaw's like on the floor, because why am I in a town of 10,000 people traveling the entire country? Like, what are the odds? I think that's what he was thinking, is like, someone like that probably wouldn't choose to come through Brookhaven intentionally, most likely. Like, no, that's not to knock on Brookhaven. It's just a small town. So we start connecting really fast. We're talking about our specific camera models, things we love. I'm telling about how I'm shooting on film and not doing a digital backup. He's like, that's crazy, man. Why wouldn't you do a digital backup? It's 2022. You could even just take a picture on your phone. And I was like, no, but I trust the process, I trust that if the photos come out, they come out, and if they don't, they don't. And that's the beauty of life, that sometimes things work and sometimes they don't. And he was like, you're freaking awesome. And he was like, 10 minutes into our conversation, and this guy's younger than me. He goes, me and my wife and kids have an extra room in our house. Like, how about instead of sleeping at a rest area tonight, we'd love to host you. And again, me and my preconceived notions about the Deep South, I'm like, I'm gonna get converted to Christianity. Oh God. I'm on this trip because I rejected religion, and here I am about to get, Deep South, whatever. Again, that's entirely my own biases. But I was like, we talked about so many specific camera models that I was willing to risk it with this guy. Worst case scenario, I think, worst case scenario could be crazy, but like in my head, the worst case scenario was that I would go there in the evening and it would be weird or too religious for me, and then I would just leave instead of spending the night. So I go up to Jackson, I come back down, and in that evening, I show up, and his wife, Caroline, cooks us a lovely Cajun dinner. Their kids are adorable. They've got this big dog. They've got a cute home. And Daniel, at the end of our dinner, says, no pressure, but I have 2 motorcycles, and I'd love to teach you how to ride. And I'm thinking, at the beginning of my trip, I manifested this. I was like, I hope a stranger teaches me how to ride a motorcycle. I could not have planned this if I tried. And you can see his motorcycle helmet's there, which I didn't notice when I met him in the coffee shop. So he teaches me how to ride a motorcycle. We come back, we eat some chocolate cake, edit our photos together. We took a bunch of photos of each other on our motorcycles, and it was so much fun, a dream come true. And then, of course, he's like, listen, no pressure. But I've got, I understand you grew up in Ohio, you never shot a gun, never held a gun. Would you like to hold a gun? I was like, oh my God. At first I thought I was gonna join Christianity. Now I think I'm gonna join the NRA. Like, what's gonna happen? So I'm like, yeah, of course I wanna hold a gun. I'm in the Deep South. I'm in Brookhaven, Mississippi. Of course I'm gonna hold your gun. Just show me that it's unloaded first, please. And his kids were asleep, of course, so I felt safer about it. And he pulls out his, not just military grade, but like a fully custom M4 rifle, unloads it right in front of me, and here you go. And I was just like, oh my God. Like, I don't know how any of you feel about gun control, but I was like, there's no reason I should be holding this right now. And he was like, dude, we could go, we're not gonna do this now, but we could go shoot it in the backyard and nobody would bat an eye. Nobody would call the police, nothing. And I was like, dude, I live in Chicago. Like, if I hear a gunshot, I guess it happens too, but I'd be scared. He's like, yeah, nobody would care. But we didn't do that. But anyway, that was Daniel Williams. And he showed me, again, I had this idea that if I go into the Deep South as a brown man, I'm gonna experience hate and just hate and racism. And I don't know, maybe it's an anomaly. Maybe if it happened again, it wouldn't go the same way, but I experienced a lot of kindness. Extraordinary kindness from everybody I met in Mississippi. Daniel's advice for his younger self was, everyone has their own experiences and you can't judge them based on the ones that you've had. I feel like everyone wants to judge people on the surface, but you can't really judge someone until you've known them for a bit. Pretty good advice from a guy who's in his early 20s. So that was Daniel Williams. Oh, I should have mentioned too, that summer, 2022, was a rough summer for mass shootings in America. The 2 that really stood out to me, which is crazy to say that I have to pick 2. That's a wild sentence to say in America, but The two that stood out that summer were the Tops supermarket shooting in Buffalo, where white supremacists came from 2 hours away and shot up a supermarket in a predominantly black neighborhood, and the Uvalde shooting, where an 18-year-old kid bought a rifle just, I think, days prior and shot up his elementary school. And so, of course, gun control and guns were a really touchy subject, extra touchy that summer, and we had a productive conversation about gun control in America. I don't think that sentence has ever been said. We had a productive conversation about gun control in America. And that gave me a lot of hope about the future, about the next generation of leaders, even for the ones who have grown up with guns, who are part of the NRA, who are Gen Z, who actually have a different perspective on gun ownership. And that gave me a little bit of hope. So that was very interesting. And here's a picture we took together at the end. So cute. So like I said, I shot on film. On this 50-year-old camera. This is the one. This is a Yashica Mat 124G. It shoots on 6x6 black and white film. Well, I chose to shoot in black and white, but 6x6 120 film for anybody who wants to get into the details. But I thought I would just wait to develop until the end. I was like, I'm going to trust the process. It's risky. For anybody who has shot film before, you know that even if a pinhole, they call them pinholes, even if a tiniest amount of light gets into your camera, your film's ruined. Your photos are, there's no saving them. They're shot. But I was willing to risk it. And this is what it looked like. But about the halfway point, I thought I should probably be responsible about this. I should probably make sure a roll is okay. And so about the halfway point, I'm like in Jacksonville, Florida, and I'm going west. And so I'm calling all these camera shops along the way saying, please, I'm doing this crazy thing. I need you to develop a roll for me. And all of them are like, sorry, we can't. Like, it takes 2 weeks to develop black and white, because film developing shops can develop color in 30 minutes, but they can't do black and white in a machine. They have to do it by hand. And so I get to Oklahoma City and I call a camera shop, and this guy hears it and he's like, wow, I would love to develop a roll for you by hand tonight. I'll do it in my bathroom. I will send you photos tonight if it works. Hopefully your photos are good. And I'm like, awesome, cool. So I drop it off with him and he develops it, and sure enough, that roll turned out perfectly. So I knew at least in the first half of my photos would be great. I know my camera well enough to be, it's an extension of me. I know the sounds, I know the feeling of it. I know when it's working, but still things can go wrong. So it was such a relief to know that it went right. I was trusting that it would work for the rest of the trip. We talked a lot about our backgrounds as first-generation Americans. He's the son of 2 Vietnamese immigrants, and I'm the son of 2 Indian immigrants. And I loved his advice. Once again, he's a young guy, and his advice was, don't compromise on the things you don't want to compromise on. Stick with your gut. Stick with what you know and believe in, and don't settle for less. Now, if that applies to you, that's fine. If it doesn't, remember, he's sharing his experience for himself. He's not telling you what to do, he's telling his younger self what to do. And so for all these pieces of advice, it's tempting to want to think about it for ourselves first, but in reality, it should be the other way around. Think about it for this person first. What might have led this person to come to this conclusion? And does that apply to me? If yes, cool, great. You're seen. There's another human being who sees the same way you do. If not, it's okay, no problem. So that was Scott. If you ever need film developed, Oklahoma City, that's the way to go. But also, totally by chance, he invited me to a film photographers meetup that evening at a brewery, and I met a bunch of friends in Oklahoma City, and coincidentally, my brother and his now fiance moved to Oklahoma City about a year later, and so now I had my own network there, in addition to the reason to visit my brother and fiance, which was like a beautiful connection moment. So I told you we were going to get to the story of an RV tipping over and a matching tattoo with a man who was dying of cancer. So on this day, and I can't remember the exact day, but I'm driving from the southern border of Colorado up to Broomfield. I hadn't showered in 3 days. I was nasty, gross. I needed a shower so bad, and usually I showered at Planet Fitnesses around the country. For whatever reason, I guess I just didn't find one. And so I'm like, okay, I'll stop in Colorado Springs for an hour. I'll talk to whoever I can talk to there. And then I'll just keep going up to Broomfield, where I'll have a hotel. I budgeted for like 6 or 7 hotel stays. And I was like, I'm ready for a hotel stay. I want to sleep in a bed. I want to take a nice hot shower. And I don't want to have to worry about hearing all these people in the gym, you know? So I'm in Colorado Springs. I talk to a stranger, and they're like, this is so weird. You're the second guy to come up to me and saying he's talking to strangers. And in my head, I'm picturing like a literal twin of me. I'm like, well, who did this? Am I actually a government experiment, and like we've been activated to go across the country and we're just in Colorado Springs at the same time? I don't know. And I was like, oh my God. This person said they met him an hour prior. And I'm thinking, if I hadn't gotten stuck on the highway earlier when an RV trailer tipped over on the highway because of the wind and blocked us on the highway for 2 hours, I would have met this legend. And spoiler alert, I met him, but in my head, I'm thinking, this is like destiny, you know what I mean? Like, things work out sometimes, sometimes they don't. And so I keep going on. I'm on the last photo of my roll, and I'm talking to a cashier at a gift shop, and she is giving me her answer. I didn't have any extra film with me. It was in my car somewhere else. And some guy scoots past me. I pay no attention to him. I finish up with the cashier, and I start to walk out, and I hear a guy say, "Excuse me, are you doing a documentary?" And I turn around, and it's this tall white man with a big beard and hundreds of tattoos. It's Don Caskey. And of course, he tells me a story. He got diagnosed with stage 4 kidney cancer in 2019. He will die soon. He looks healthy. He was healthy when I met him, but he's like, you never know. I'm getting treated right now, but I am dying, and I'm using the remaining time that I have to get matching tattoos with complete strangers. Now, I told you I went on this journey to figure out the meaning of life. In a lot of ways, I found it in him. Because here's a guy who's staring death in the face, who has a totally unique perspective in that way. We're all dying, technically, but for somebody with stage 4 cancer, he is probably confronting death sooner than most of us. And his advice stuck with me the most. He said, "I wish I wouldn't have worked as hard and as many hours. I missed out on a lot of things. When I got sick, I lost everything, but having nothing is when I got more than I ever had in my life. I swear to God, I'm homeless, I have no car, but I never sleep in the street, and I always have a couple of dollars for beer every day." Having less is more, I'm telling you. The biggest thing in the world you can have is human connection. Without somebody else to live with, nobody'd want to be here. It was a really beautiful sentiment to see a guy who's facing death and using his remaining time just to connect with people. And of course, after we talk, I was like, you know, Don, I've never even wanted a tattoo. I'm an artist myself. I've never even wanted art. And it's funny because you can probably see I have a bunch of tattoos now. But I think this is a sign that I need to get my first tattoo. So sure enough, 2 days later, I come back down, and we went to an artist named Richie Billion in Colorado Springs and got a tattoo of a roll of film, 120 roll. Got mine on my forearm right there, and he got his on his knee. And for those of you who have shot film before, you know that there's sensitivity. It's usually 100, 400, or 800 usually. And I found out while we were getting tattooed that I was the 435th person to get a matching tattoo with him. So we made it say 435 instead. Now, Don unfortunately passed away this past February last year, and it was sad, but it was also like a beautiful thing because we really only knew each other for like 2 or 3 days, and we kept in touch on Instagram after, but we had really only connected in person for a few hours total, but the connection was so deep. It didn't have to be a lifetime to feel like this person is so important to me, and we have a permanent connection until death. It's a beautiful moment. So this is a stranger I met in the middle of nowhere, Red Rock Canyon National Park, Arizona. It was me, her, and I think her daughter, and no one else as far as the eye could see. It was super windy, super hot, and some people had their advice immediately. Some of them had their advice right off the bat, what they wished they knew earlier, and other people had to think. And she had to think, but when she said her advice, oh my God, it was so fire. I had to polish up all the stranger's advice to get rid of filler words. But I wanted to make sure it sounded like their voices. You know, everybody has a unique way of talking, and it's challenging to get that in writing, but I needed to make sure it was true. I did not have to polish hers. This is what she said. Y'all are going to go, oh, right after this. When our expectations of others aren't met, we should look not to them, but to ourselves, because it's most likely our own fault. Oh. So good. If our expectations of others aren't met, we should look not to them, but to ourselves, because it's most likely our own fault. Again, that's not advice for you. It's advice for her younger self. It might apply to you. It might not, and that's okay. But I'm glad I gave her the chance to think. No rush. And one more stranger whose advice I'll share in detail. And this is a little bit of a longer one, but my question was, what do you know now that you wish you knew earlier? Sometimes I phrase that as, if you could go back in time and talk to your younger self, what would you tell them? And sometimes I phrase it as, what did you have to learn the hard way? And This stranger, 668, who I met in Newport, Oregon, called out that question in the most polite, beautiful way he possibly could have. And I'm going to read this. It's about 300 words, but I promise it's so beautiful. Again, this was one I did not have to polish. It was unbelievable. This might be God. If you commit to the idea that you could have done something differently earlier, you're committing to the idea that you somehow went astray. But maybe you never did. We're living in a reality that we think of as a balance of chaos and order, but that's not true. Chaos is fundamental to order. We wish that our tiny little decisions would work out how we want them to work, and we can barely live with the idea that a random encounter is worth more than all of our planning and efforts. You could bend over to pick up a quarter and then bump into the person you're going to marry and hang out with for the rest of your life. We desperately go through life grasping for a script to understand, so we continue to say to ourselves, gosh, if only I hadn't veered from this point to this point, or if only I hadn't made the wrong decision or wrong turn here or there. But because we don't actually know what's good for us in the long run, we're kind of just going through it. So in a certain sense, there's nothing that I would have done differently. There's nothing that I would have changed. Because then I don't know what would have changed to follow afterward. And maybe I would be nowhere near where I am right now. We're on a perfect beach with the sun setting. The sand is butter soft and I'm buried in it. I wouldn't want to be anywhere else. Perfectly called out the absurdity of my question. The truth is we can never change the past. It is only in our power to change our futures. And in a lot of ways, stranger number 668's advice is the only one that matters for the question that I asked. So all in all, it took me 84 days living in my Toyota Camry. Occasionally I had friends who hosted me along the way. I drove 15,298 miles to all the lower 48 US states to ask 1,000 strangers for life advice. I got back to my hometown of Columbus, Ohio, developed all of the film. I developed it in my childhood home kitchen. I hung them up to dry in my childhood home bathroom. And I digitized them in my childhood bedroom, all before moving back to Chicago to go there. And of course, at the end of it, I was like, I learned so much from this, I need to share it. I did this for me. I didn't do it for TikTok. I didn't do it for Instagram. I didn't do it for content. I did it for me. I could have thrown the whole series away and I would have still learned everything I did. But I knew I needed to share it because, and I'll tell you at the end why, there's such a big learning. I knew I had to share it a free way, a paid way, and an artistic credibility way. Free way was, of course, social media. Paid way, I turned it into a book called Advice from America. And the artistic cred, eventually I'd like to exhibit this in galleries and maybe one day museums. Who knows? So I'd like to share some of the themes. I'll be completely honest with you. The initial thought for this talk was to analyze the data, the qualitative data, to categorize each of them for themes, and then present the actual numbers of how many people said this and this and this and that. And I thought I was going to use ChatGPT to make my life easier. And as it turns out, in 2024, ChatGPT hallucinates a lot. So I gave it a list of 219 themes about life. And every time I prompted it, I said, don't forget, don't go away from those 219. And after about 10 or 11, every single time, it would start using categories that weren't on the list. So I will give you anecdotally the things that I noticed the most. Eventually, I will make a video probably on my TikTok or Instagram about the actual data, but I'm realizing I'm going to need a human who I'm going to hire to help me do this. So number one, this is going to be no surprise to anybody. Love. So many people talked about love. And they talked about every aspect of it. Some people said, I wish I would have gotten married sooner. Some people said, I wish, or don't be afraid to bring, literally one person said, don't be afraid to bring a husband home from spring break. I took photos of all the strangers individually, but for her, it was her and her husband. I had to, and I specified in the book, like, it's the strangers from the advice is from the stranger on the left. But other people talked about divorce and breakups and relationships getting messy and this and that. Everybody talked about love. It was so fascinating because I'll tell you what, I posted a piece of advice from one of the strangers I met in Buffalo, New York on Instagram, and that one got, like, I think hundreds of thousands of views. And her advice was 3 words: don't get married. And the comments were a wild mix. I couldn't believe it. It was like a fascinating experience to post that and to have it kind of get a lot of views, because half of the comments were, "This is the worst advice I've ever heard." And I say it in that voice because it was mostly men saying that. And the other half were, this is spot on. I wish I would have never gotten married. But you have to remember, her advice of don't get married is not for you. It's not for me. It was for her. And it's probably pretty good advice for her. Love. Again, no surprise. A lot of people talked about money. And I knew this one. I knew I was going to get this a lot. Money, we live in a capitalistic society. We are at like the edge of capitalism right now. Of course, people are going to talk about money. Most of the time it was save more money, invest earlier, which is, I think, good advice. But I always wanted to know more, because at the root of that, it's wanting to have more money right now. And so I always followed up with, what would you do if you had more money right now? And to my surprise, I thought people were going to be like, I'd buy a bigger house, I'd buy a Mercedes, I'd buy this, I'd buy that. And instead, like, I think all but one of them said, I would just be a little bit more comfortable, a little bit less stressed, and I could work fewer hours so that I could spend more time with people I love and care about, which beautiful. Like, I couldn't believe that. Of course, if the reality was that I handed somebody $500,000 who said that, I'm sure they would buy a nice new car, and that's okay. But at the end of the day, the sentiment of wanting more money was about connecting with others, about living life, and I thought that was pretty interesting. So many strangers talked about being yourself. So many, and this was from all ages, all genders, everything. Being yourself, because so many people, if they were older, they talked about how it took them 30, 40 years after their 20s to really be who they knew they wanted to be all along. And for somebody who was younger, it was just like a tumultuous time through high school and college before they could finally just stop worrying about what other people think about you. There was a girl I met in Indianapolis who was wearing elf ears. She was at a board game convention, and she was like, in high school I was so nervous about people thinking I was a nerd, and here I am, and I am a nerd, full on. I love it. I embrace this lifestyle. I have made the best friendships of my life because I am who I am now. I am who I wanted to be all along, and I wish I had the confidence to do that when I was in high school. So that was a beautiful sentiment. Again, I heard this everywhere, all over the place, from people of every background. And one more major theme that I noticed was that it'll be okay, which I think overall it is a somewhat privileged statement to say it'll be okay, because that's not always a guarantee. That's not always a guarantee, and there's probably like a survivorship bias there too, to say it'll be okay. But the sentiment from anybody, again, whether they were in their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, was that in the moment when you're experiencing something that is challenging and sends you into a cycle of grief, it feels like the world is over. When I lost my pet bird, I had to put my pet bird down a few years ago, threw me into the craziest cycle of grief. When I got broken up with for the first time, it threw me into a crazy cycle of grief, and I thought the world was over. I was like, I do not know how I'm going to function to this evening, let alone tomorrow. And that is grief. It's real. It's a sign that you've cared a lot and that you're experiencing a major change. But everybody who said this said, now that I'm here, it just feels like a little blip. It'll be okay. You'll get through it. One day at a time, 1 hour at a time, whatever it takes. So I told you I went on this journey to figure out the meaning of life and to push myself radically out of my comfort zone. And I believe that I found a purpose and meaning to life that feels right to me, that I think applies no matter what religion you are. And I also found one other major discovery. And that major discovery first was that I heard the same things over and 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 over again across the entire country, every race, every gender, every age, every region. And at first it was annoying. I thought maybe, this was naive, I thought maybe I might get 1,000 unique pieces of advice. But then I realized this is an amazing sign that I'm hearing the same things over and over again from people of all backgrounds and all regions. The truth is we have so much more in common with one another than the things that tear us apart. And I think this proves it. That, I think, it's an especially timely message. It's something I truly believe in, and it's something that I think gets reinforced every time I meet a new person, especially when they're from a different background. We have so much more in common with one another than the things that tear us apart. That changed everything for me. I have a whole new way of seeing the strangers and people around me. Most of you in this room I don't recognize, and I just know that there's something that each and every one of us can deeply connect over, even if we have major differences in opinions about politics and the future and whatever. At the end of the day, we're all going through a very similar human experience, just a human experience. But the meaning of life, what I believe to be true about the purpose of life, is that the only way to make the most of your life is to experience everything fully. The good, the bad, and the in-between. I think there's this idea, especially in America, that once you have enough money, once you have a big enough house, when your partner's amazing, when your family's amazing, then life will be perfect all the time. And I know I'm only 26, but I now know that that's not true. Life will never be perfect. You can have everything, and life will always have its ups, and it'll always have its downs, and it'll always have a lot of the in-between. But if you can experience everything fully, if you can be happy when you're happy, sad when you're sad, and angry when you're angry, if you can feel your feelings fully, it won't matter whether you get to live 30 years or 100, because you will have made the most of it regardless. So my challenge for you, for the duration of your time at South by Southwest 2024, for the duration of this Tuesday, is to talk to as many people as you possibly can. It's so easy here specifically because we're all wearing a South by Southwest badge. We are all here for the exact same conference, but probably different reasons. It is so easy to stand in a line or sit next to somebody and say, "Hi, what's your name?" "I'm Imran. Nice to meet you. What brought you to South by?" So easy. It should also be so easy to just say, "I like your shoes" at a grocery store. Have a great day. That's my challenge for you. So at the end of the day, I have to give a shameless plug. I did turn this into a 672-page, 7-pound coffee table photo book. This thing is a beast. I self-published it. I got it funded through Kickstarter last year. It's available on Amazon right now. And more than anything, what I want to leave you with is a reminder that the past is unchangeable. But the future is up to us to create, and I believe that creating the future that we would want to live in, that the next generation want to live in, starts by connecting with one another. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for coming to my session. This is beautiful.